Dweller of the Dark.
We are Chennault, honoring the yellowed and blackened bones of many prominent authors. We will be digging up several obscure, strange, and forgotten authors who influenced many of the great horror, science fiction, and fantasy writers today. Comment below if you like. If you have authors that you'd like to see recognized, list them in the comments. Contact our author page. Subscribe for more tales of the horrifying, obscure, strange, and forgotten. We'll have quite a collection, climbing out of the tombs. If you like any of our tales, ring the bell and crush the like button below. Authors, always looking for fresh blood. Subscribe and contact us for more information. Check out our other stories on YouTube and our other websites. YouTube, Dweller of the Dark. Official website, dwellerofthedark.com. Check us out on Facebook at Jeffrey LeBlanc, horror writer. Find our books on Amazon and Kindle. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Patreon, and Bandcamp, and now Rumble. Children of horror. A freezing man on a mountain recalls being accused of vampirism. An archaeologist runs for his life from a mythological serpent in a swamp. And a young boy unleashes demonic evil from a psychotic vagrant as we dwell in darkness with Jeffrey LeBlanc. Our latest ghostly tale may get us screamed at by a banshee. The Curious Death of Dionysus Chennault is a new short story that we will be including in the collection These Hallowed Horrors, set for publication December 2020. Our story focuses on Dionysus Chennault and his encounter with a supernatural terror in a frozen swamp. What is terrorizing Dionysus Chennault on his lonely island? Can Dionysus solve the mystery of the banshee? Or will he choke under the strain? The Curious Death of Dionysus Chennault by Jeffrey LeBlanc. 1. Sometimes there's more than cane in a field. I stand in a desolate cane field next to a dead man. His neck is twisted and bent at an unnatural angle. The yellowed, waxen skin, rifled with wounds, of his throat and torso are exposed. As I look on with a gust of cold wind at my back, I notice chunks of flesh have been torn from both. Maculations of crimson on leaves and the splatter of frozen blood surround his body. But it's the eyes of the man I'll remember to my last days. Wide, fixed in shock, they hide some terrifying secret only the mutilated corpse may know. In the distant swamp, far removed from the cane, I hear something shriek. I shudder, remembering the haunted warning of another man long put to earth. It's the warning of Halley, so eloquently referenced by Ambrose Bierce. In spirit, those words, from a dead man, seem to lend themselves an explanation of my lurid recollection to the events surrounding Dionysus Chennault. For by death is wrought greater change than hath been shown, whereas in general the spirit that removed cometh back upon occasion, and is sometimes seen of those in flesh, appearing in the form of the body it bore. Yet it hath happened that the veritable body without the spirit hath walked, and it is attested of those encountering who have lived to speak thereon, that a lich so raised up hath no natural affection, nor remembrance thereof, but only hate. Also, It is known that some spirits which in life were benign become by death evil altogether. 2. Only the insane sleep alone in a frozen swamp. Icy was the night in lonesome October of 1972 when a man awoke on a swamp island and screamed. Phosphorescent moon glistened on fields of frost and deftly glistening icicle as he screeched the name, Madeline Morvant! Sweating, exhaling clouds of frosted breath, and panicked, he had lifted his head from the ice tomb of this waterlogged place. Eyes remained wide, staring out amongst the stillness of darkest night, trying to reconcile his jumbled thoughts. Through the abyss of night, he convulsed, then screamed a second time, Madeline Morvant! Dionysus Chennault was our terrified sleeper's name. Before, he had lived in a rundown house on the outskirts of New Orleans. But which shore of the beyond Dionysus resides now is uncertain, for the screaming man of the swamp is dead. An individual who spends the entirety of his life sleeping on swamp islands covered with ice, moss, and dead leaves is not long for this world. With nothing under him but the dry cypress leaves, frozen earth, and stinging nettle, and nothing above him but the flea-infested moss, the bare, creaking twist of cypress and tupelo. He cannot hope for great longevity in this world. Truly, life is as brief as a flickering candle, ever extinguished to ash when the leaves have fallen, and the sky from which the earth has fallen into ice and stillness engulfs. Dionysus Chennault was struck with a peculiar feeling of knowing, yet not knowing the meaning of the name he screamed. It was to Dionysus the name of a woman he had never met. After having screamed a second time, no other clear reference was made, and the man said nothing more. Why had Dionysus said that name? Surely it was not an unseated memory boring into his thick skull. What manifestation brought the word Madeline Morvant to tongue was a mystery. Chennault had reached the precipice of youth, 25 years. People of this vast world, billions across the globe, still regarded such youthful age as on the cusp of a future beholden to promise. They are the children destined to shape and to mold our new age. From a teeming shore of possibility, we may view their voyage of existence from the port of endless challenge to the treacherous reefs of failure. We may watch in merriment as they struggle on toward a mirage of success as a dog chasing their tail. Or smile proudly as some reach the golden coast of accomplishment, provided the considerable distance to reach said coast has not met with incalculable loss or soul-crushing sacrifice. With our extinguished soul in this instance, however, there is suspicious speculation and certain disregard that Dionysus Chennault met his untimely end by exposure. Chennault had spent his days wandering the swamp islands, flotants east of Avoca Island. He had the youthful aspiration to hunt for the lost Jean Lafitte treasures in the island ground. How great was his golden endeavor in contrast with observing and capturing the splendid beauty of nature. The solace of nature should have been his bounty, and not the plunder of gold. As afternoon chilled from the encompassing iced clouds, Dionysus lost his way in the maze of gray sky and endless gray trees that a swamp can encompass. Had he trekked onward west to Deadwood, he'd have easily observed the visible abandoned church or cemetery, the proverbial North Star for the Atchafalaya lost. Chennault may have found sanctuary. Winding log trails and intersecting trees had so impeded him that Dionysus became overwhelmed by encroaching night while following a large, unnamed tributary. Impenetrable thickets of wax myrtle, python grass, and twist and thorn undergrowth enraged and confused Dionysus. In a final surrender to nature, he succumbed to lethargic fatigue. Amongst wild-growing sage and stinging nettles, he had laid down near the root of a twisted muscadine into a dreamless sleep. Midnight in the valley of nightmarish dream, and Chennault screamed frightening words that conjured up all manner of dread and possibly spectral visitation. Had he tapped into a name linked to nature's vengeful, mysterious messengers, or God's gliding wraith? Would this Madeleine Morvant bring monstrosities scenting glimmers of silvery moonlight to rise on the horizon? Could speaking the unknowable initiate the demonic or phantasmic guardians of shadow to slither from domains below? Too many possibilities of what caused him to say the word Madeleine Morvant. Each attempted recollection causing an amnesic recoil to what it all had meant. Scattered impulses and winding trepidations haunted Dionysus, now as ghosts, twisting their approach eastward with each mirror shard of moonlight on rippling water. Maybe it was the place he had chosen to sleep. Maybe the fog-fetid, ghostly wake of the haunted bayous whispered awakening words in the ear of the sleeper. Awakened and panicked, Chennault had sat upright and spoke. Was this a living or dead person? He could not say. Dionysus Chennault only knew he had screamed Madeleine Morvant out of sleep. Her name again held no inference to his lost soul. Dionysus Chennault had never been a theologian or taken on the deep sciences of psychology, nor had the man been of the nature for logical and albeit analytical thinking. Pulled from exhausted slumber by a frightful word at night in a mist, this word by Chennault had hardly intrigued the callous man. Madeleine Morvant had been drawn from his illiterate lips and created a menace with just the name. No memory of its meaning to him specifically had enlightened curiosity. The word did not obsess the lost wanderer to investigate the phenomenon. Dionysus conjectured that the icy feeling he had awakened to, that chilling shiver down his spine, the heart palpitating dread, was in reflection to the time of season. It was an autumn chill in an isolated landscape, and nothing more. Chennault relented his inquiries and returned to his cool bed of cypress-smelling earth and slumber. However, he would no longer be awarded a restful night. Terrifying nightmares would accompany him now. The nightmare began with Dionysus traveling across several rows of pristine cane and several more rows of abandoned, decaying fields. As he journeyed, he noticed changes to the plant fauna. They began emerald green and gradually became brilliant pearl as gathering darkness erupted in rolling clouds of thunder, bringing forth lightning-streaked night. A barrage of sleep arrived long after the storm had approached. Why Dionysus continued the paths, why he did not seek shelter or make one in the dream, he did not know. In his mind, not running from the storm, all seemed logical and natural, as is the way in many a nightmare. Maybe on those distant dead shores of the beyond, the horrific, the malevolent, and the unnerving cease concern, and preservation or protecting one's soul or life is put to rest. At a crossroads of cane fields, Chennault found he had escaped the macabre landscape and threatening storms. Now the trail he trekked was a twisting trail, bordered on each side by large, vampiric red roses. Obviously, it was a path never traveled, each step along the way mired in apprehension and dread as roses lunged their thorny teeth at him to incise. Yes, the trail was proving preternatural, malignant in design. However, it was the briefest scent of the sinister. What scene of terror could possibly hold sway beyond this? An evil path would certainly move forward to more enlightening and less perilous abode. Evil, in this instance of the nightmare, would surely shrivel away. But good judgment be tossed, as Dionysus Chennault continued without hesitation, impelled by some imperious necessity, some compelled force, a shriek of mariner's siren, or far worse, driving him to that wayward shore. The malevolent, the maligned, and the mystical and formless, invisible existences began somehow to cast shadows around him on his journey. Vision played tricks and light could no longer be trusted. The rose path turned to a fluorescent, living vineyard of all varieties of grape that grasped to take Dionysus's blood. He heard all around him ancient chants and chimes of several types of bells. Whispers hissed and spoke incoherently in a strange tongue which Dionysus had no comprehension. Could those chants be fragmentary utterances of a darker, inconceivable, or incomprehensible, monstrous conspiracy against his body and soul? Approaching the witch's hour, the intimations of vine, greenish luminescence, and darkness cloaked Dionysus through his journey, having no point of finite conclusion. Mysterious was this verdant illumination that vaguely cast spectral shadow, possibly of wraith and reaper. Between each growth of grape and vine, as he sojourned on, were shallow pools created by harvest. At first, these pools seemed condensed from rain or mist, but as Chennault met each pool with discerning eye, he observed crimson ripples with each gleam. Amazement and wonder held sway in Dionysus's dream. Curiosity caused him to stoop. Unbridled intrigue drove him to plunge both his hands to know with certain dread the very nature of the syrupy substance. "Oh, dear God, this can't be!" Dionysus screamed into the vacuum of dream and darkness, staining his fingers, his clothes, and even his boots. Blood! Everywhere was the glow of phosphorescence and of blood. It oozed between row upon rows of grapes. Blood was in everything and everywhere. Wild, dead sage, wild, dead lilacs, and even the trees of cypress surrounding this macabre vineyard dripped crimson with clots and splashes on their foliage. Patches of vineyard earth between the vines were pitted and spattered as with a red deluge. Crimson mist enveloped trees of the adjacent bayous winding near the vineyard, which too carried the maculations of crimson, like dew ever further onto the lowly aquatic plants. Was there some cause for the creation of this scene of blood? Could he subconsciously be bringing about such a manifestation of terror into his mind from forgotten slight? Every vision and every nuance of the dripping substance seemed compatible with the fulfillment of a natural rendering of expectation, of guilty justice for some indescribable act. What was this unknowable act that in dream produces such vengeance to rectify guilt? Dionysus, Chennault again could not rightly remember. Apparitions took shape in clouded ash, vagueness. Menacing phantoms and mysterious forms conjured from the crimson surroundings to dig forth from the subconscious, revealing all in horrific time. In vain, no reveal to Chennault's past awoke memory. If it was slight to unforgivable transgression, then the amnesic man was an unknown innocent victim. Maybe this horrific scene manifested through the subconscious of some other mind. Yes, that was it. The blood truly symbolized tragedy conjured from someone else's guilt, winding and twisting as ragweeds as they found way to Dionysus's mind. Image after image, haunting another of Chennault's forgotten memories. Consequence collaborating with confusion and obscurity, but to no avail, allowing Chennault to grasp what he sought. Frustrated, failure to know, to deduce, augmented his panic. Was he wrong that this was another's punishment? Conflicted was this man. Had or had not Dionysus committed the most unforgivable transgression? Murder. Could he, cloaked in night and hindered by memory, have been capable of murder? An act once committed, never to be forgiven, and yet unknown as to the whom or why. Frightening was this nightmare that chained Chennault to its whims. The odor of decay emanated from winter-dead noxious plants, the blood, and the trees. All conjured that image of phantasmic death to slight any opportunity for Dionysus to have slumbered in peace. Then came cackling, high-pitched screams from around and overhead. Audible and startling moans and sighs expressed themselves from somewhere on a dimensionless plane. Maybe from lurking fiends not of this earth. These were the sounds he could endure no longer. Forcing his mouth and lungs to scream, he found them useless. Like magic or some other dark force had maligned Dionysus Chennault to silence and inaction after a multitude of shouts with the full strength of his lungs. Stammering, pleading to some divine power, Chennault found a vacant savior, broken in spirit and voice. He heard only the tither and cackles of the creeping, glowing phantoms haunting the night. Casting a stare into an infinite multitude of unfamiliar hissing and screeching sounds, he spoke. With pious incredulity and maybe babbling, Dionysus attempted to speak. He was given a brief respite from being a mute. I plead for forgiveness of some act I may or may not have done to you, to the beings who hold no animosity or anger to me. I implore your protection from the malevolent entities that seek me harm. Chennault, encouraged by a brief silence of the monstrous noises, continued. As he was speaking, practically stammering with fear, he continued, directing his plea beyond the vineyards to the haunted swamps beyond the distant fields. Hear my words, protective souls of the night. See my words written in the musical language of the living, for I am just a fallible man, at the mercy of the immortals of these woods, a conciliatory creator. Oh, dear spirits, I implore, see this humble musician as a penitent lyricist searching for the song to capture repentance and forgiveness from you. It is important to address here the musical talent and the content of character of the repentant lyricist. Dionysus Chennault was neither a musical talent nor ever repentant in any devilish endeavor. Chennault may have had a screech of lyrical ability and possibly the potential for penance, but again, both were rendered in his dreams. Dionysus wrote his song as his life depended on it. He had grasped his treasure book of numbers he found within a blank page to write the words that, if sounded, would grate as nails on a chalkboard. Within his dream, curiously, Dionysus somehow lost his trusty pen. In replacement, a grapevine provided a faux stylus. As a well to ink his words, Dionysus used a saturated leaf to dip his pen. While in haste to complete the recurring chord, a screech of cackling laughter broke out in front of him, ever approaching with the speed of thought. The evil source hovered above and around Chennault. No forgiveness came from that cackle. The laugh carried neither joy nor happiness, a blackest soul. Its sound could be that of the screeching owl as it attacked prey and pounced from heaven to cold, damp earth. Another cackle and screech that advanced and fell back into the fog. Dionysus Chennault sensed, though, in that primitive place where we all fear cloaked predatory evil, that the source was nearby. It paced on the outer banks of the mist. There was the horrific and strange sensation of being watched and baited to react. Dionysus felt in disgust that he was being toyed with as a black cat with a yellow canary. In the shiver of his cold bones, some supernatural malevolence was indifferent to his plight. Most assuredly, the invisible existence swarmed about him, relishing in his panic and savoring every second Chennault feared his demise. More hideous waves of laughter coming ever closer, then backing away. More cackles and more whispers of an impending approach. Directions of the cackles and whispers he did not know. He dared not move and dared not call out to the hideous being hunting him now. Unhinged terror replaced fear and chained him in thrall. Dionysus had to stay focused and not give in to the mob of terror. One thought: reprieve the insanity, complete the song, appeal to the protective spirits of the haunted vineyard to save him. Dionysus stumbled with his hands, and blood splotched and splattered the book, writing and cracking several vines in his endeavor. Chennault aimed to complete his work. A closer cackle froze Chennault in mid-sentence. Sure hands for a moment denied his will. He continued. A razor-slicing screech shattered his hearing. A powerful hurricane force sent him falling to his knees in agony. Abruptly, Dionysus Chennault froze in terror a second time. Arms contorted, paralyzed. His treasure book fell to cold, frigid earth. Dionysus could not scream and could not move. Another screech, another gust of wind sent him flailing onto his back. In a profound moment, Dionysus Chennault found himself staring into the sharply drawn face and blank, dead eyes of his deceased mother. She stood there, skeletal, white, and silent in the rotted garments of the grave. 3. The folly of fighting the vengeful dead. The apparition was every inconceivable harbinger of evil. Every dark legend raised from the pit of Erebus. Banshee, vampire, walking dead, flesh without soul. Conjured from Mephistopheline design. The Banshee confronting the lyricist in the haunted wood was, and was not, Dionysus Chennault's dead mother, Madeleine Morvant. Guilt, regret, repentance, maybe, all manifested in that dark vineyard of his imagination. The ghost stirred no familial love nor empathy in his dying heart. Gasping, his last, brought a golden past, soured by Madeleine's bitter end at Dionysus's hands. And yet, the event neither inspired affection or regret of any kind by either Dionysus or Madeleine. Clashing storms of terror and rage eclipsed all. Chennault heaved and twisted in an effort to run from the haunting corpse. The Banshee, in this terrifying instance, bewitched her son and made his legs immovable, weighted lead. Chennault could not lift his very feet from the frigid ground. Screams were useless, as well as her dark gifts had stolen his voice. The hurricane winds returned, pinning Dionysus's arms by the same malignant force that left him further helpless. In absolute terror, Dionysus Chennault realized only his eyes were under his control. And what sights did they see? Eyes transfixed and frozen upon the lusterless, worm-dripping orbs of Madeleine Morvant. Here was providence for Dionysus Chennault. Wisdom was upon the poor man. Chennault knew now the phantom was not a soul without a body. In a dreadful, and dare we speculate, demonic turn of events, this malevolent being infesting the haunted vineyard was in fact a body without a soul. In those ravenous and vacant eyes of Madeleine was neither love, nor pity, nor anything human. There was no mercy from the Banshee. In that last moment, clawed, rotting hands clasped his throat, while the cloud of death took his mind, and some other place took his soul. Dionysus thought, a false plea for mercy falls on deaf ears to an angry God. The thought seemed tempered to the ridiculous recollection of previous profane or blasphemous wit. Consequently, and most assuredly, I'm sure it made a more rapid haste to hearken Chennault's very soul on a horrific descent to the infernal place down yonder. We reflect now on Dionysus' demise to the vengeful ghost known as Banshee. Can any mortal cope a battle with a creature possibly conjured from a dream? A creative, guilted imagination creating an unstoppable and vengeful enemy is already vanquished. Every fighter's result is the fighter's cause, and vice versa in this instance between Madeleine and Dionysus. Massive strength and massive intellect are no match for the vengeance created from the regret and the rage of a dream. In Dionysus' case, his own ghastly mind controlled those cold fingers closed upon his throat, writhing, contorting, and twisting while listening to the phantom's cackle and his flesh tear. Chennault launched backward into the mist-covered ground. He saw in that instant, as death pulled his life, the dead and drawn face of himself. Dionysus saw these with his last dying gasp. Then there was a gentle breeze rustling the creaking branches of the cane, a distant drip of water or blood, and all clouded to black. Sounds from afar, as of chimes or church bells, rang out once. Then there were the whispers of swarming, ghostly voices. A banshee's cry, screeching and sharp, damned all to silence. In that final screech, on a dark shore in the beyond, Dionysus Chennault sang sorrowfully. Blinded, he was tangled in a blood-filled vineyard as he wailed. The song cried out that he was dead. For one should leave in haste when a howl isn't the wind. A chilled, foggy night in the cane field had been followed by a morning of pelting iced rain. Not long after the first pelters of ice, a dense fog rolled in from the mighty Atchafalaya River into the surrounding swamp. By late in the afternoon, larger sheets of sleet had formed, bringing swirls of flaked ice off the nearby marshes. To the east of Dionysus's cane field, near Avoca Island, a lowly ghost of a cloud was observed by residents. It was silverish white in color and had been observed rising over the island waterway. Curiously, it seemed to hang on like a lost soul might, cling to the last vestiges of life for the briefest of moments. Certainly, it was a strange cloud that seemed for an instant to wisp upwards and form the strange shape of a man. While with one edge it clung to the brackish water surrounding Avoca, with the other it reached further and further out into the air above the lower red cypress and swaying marshes. One of the hands of the cloud seemed to wave as it drifted with an intelligent design on out toward the Atchafalaya River. But before leaving the cane field that had seen the last hours of Dionysus Chennault, it grew until the very island itself was shut out of view. In the same instant, scorched, scratching cane could be heard, pelted by ice. Cypress dropped, glass-like shards of accumulation, and all manner of wildlife stayed silent, bunkered out of the weather. For the rest of the day, light was wane. The skies continued to carry only the ghastly gray corpse and ice blue clouds with neither warmth nor comfort. Two gentlemen on a large tractor braved the bad weather to check their cane field. Protected inside the cab of the tractor, they both look out of ice-covered windows onto a seldom-used portion of the field. The field lies near a vacant large vineyard. Both cane and vineyard converge into an abandoned cemetery. The older gentleman driving the tractor is Warren Boudreaux. Warren is medium build and has sandy blonde hair covered by a John Deere hat. Carhartt winter clothing protect him from the weather. He explains some of the sugarcane aspects to a younger man on the tractor. This part of our place hasn't been yielding as it did for Grandpa. Why's that, Warren? The younger man, his brother Chris, was dressed similar and had the same athletic build. The only difference was the absence of hair under his winter cap. Grandpa said it had something to do with a poor watering system for the sugarcane. I don't know. All I do know is the cane tastes horribly sour. You can't get vinegar out of this line of sugarcane. Warren points to an aged cane stalk, long neglected with splotched leaves. The path they ride is bordered by productive sugarcane on the right side and a vacant field of stone to the left adjacent to the problem row of cane. On the vacant field sits a sparse forest of oaks, cypress, briar, and possibly the occasional iced willow. It is here they both view the impenetrable undergrowth where just the night before, Dionysus had tried to cross in vain. Chris was the first to point out the old cemetery near the cane field. As the tractor moved through mist and twisted cane, it revealed itself through the underbrush and sleet. Another half-mile by tractor, and it was within 100 yards of the nearest line of neglected cane. "So that's it, huh?" Chris asked Warren as he squinted through the storm to see more detail. "Yeah, I still don't know why Grandpa Abel didn't level it to rubble. He had recorded the place as haunted in one of his diaries, I believe. Never gave a reason as to who haunted the place or as to why he believed the place was." Warren adjusts his hat and slows the tractor so both can get a better look of the old cemetery. What they saw within the cemetery was an abandoned cypress structure of your standard early 18th century. It must have been the church for the graveyard. Both were covered in tall Johnson grass and fallen trees. The church was skeletal white with decayed streaks of gray and crimson from assaults of wind, weather, and time. It had the usual board and batten design common to the area of the period. Worn support brick and stones had tumbled in places to rubble piles. Aged Spanish and sphagnum moss covered a crumbling roof. Shattered and missing window glass had long departed. While archaeologically appealing to a working plantation, it was an eyesore to production. With scarcely a glance at the rundown blight, Warren drove on to the iced end of the field for a final look around with Chris. "I will show you where we need to start the demolition," Warren said. "We'll begin with the abandoned graveyard, then the church." Few stones remained in view. Palmetto, pasture grass, and wild sage engulfed graves for over 20 or more acres. When you pushed back the weeds, there were place stones to indicate a grave. Some of the markers were discolored stones, others were worn, rotted boards at head and foot, leaning at all angles. Many were missing, with just small remnants of ruined picket fences surrounding them. Fallen leaves covered many more. How many had lost their marked spot where over the centuries nature had reclaimed them? None living now could say. All that was left in many instances were forgotten depressions in the earth. These shallow pits being more lasting than those that provided ceremony. Decay, neglect, and of course abandonment seemed to capture the sense of a town dedicated to the forgotten dead. And, just as forgotten, cursed vine and purple cane. The men stopped the tractor and jumped down to take a last look of the sugarcane. The twisted heap of scorched cane on the roads was certainly menacing and an arduous walk. With Warren leading, they pushed their way through the growth of charred stalks, dead lilacs, and twisting vine. Halfway to the center of ice debris, both men suddenly stopped. Warren uttered to Chris a whisper of warning, and both stood motionless a minute, discerning an object in the gloom ahead. As well as he could, obstructed by brush, Chris Boudreaux followed the lead of his brother and prepared to flee or fight. Moments later, Warren moved them cautiously forward, the other following. Twisted at odd angles was the body of a dead man. It lay in the charred stalks of the aged purple cane. Stunned, Warren and Chris stood respectful and silent above the deceased. Each man noted striking particulars that caused concern as to how the man had ended here. They noted the grayed face, the position of the body, the mangled clothing. The eyes were fixed upward in what seemed a plea to heaven. The corpse's mouth jarred open and rigidly frozen from a last hellish scream. They stared on, not saying a word. After a few moments in paused, sympathetic investigation, both men circled the dead man to gain more insight. Warren took a big sigh, bent down to further examine the corpse, and reverently said, "Chris, we need the police out here. I'll call them. You call Jody and prepare a statement with the team for the press. You know they'll be all over this one, considering the time of year and location." On a closer look, what did Warren and Chris see? He saw a body lying upon its back, the legs wide apart. Both arms were thrust upward, both bent acutely, with both hands around the throat. The hands, in particular, were covered in iced blood and tightly clenched. They summarized together while awaiting law enforcement that the man must have been defending himself, though it looked more to Warren that the guy had ripped away his flesh whilst he strangled himself. But that was impossible to do with your own hands. Or was it? Nearby lay a metal detector and what looked like a collection bag full of nails and beer tabs. It was apparent there was a fight with someone. Dried, dead grass had been tossed about. The earth lay in torn clumps. Cane had been snapped and pulled of stalk. Most curiously, decaying leaves and mud had been pushed into heaps and ridges on both sides of the legs. This caused an unease with both men. By the pile of leaves and indentations in the road being in such a manner, it signified other feet than theirs had caused the commotion. And, as if to confirm what they suspected, murder, alongside the dead man's hips, were unmistakable impressions of human knees. Could this poor man have been forced to end his own life? The ghastly portrait in flesh indicated so. Purple and blackened bruises to the neck and torso, tears and chunks of flesh from the throat and shoulders, indentations of fingerprints pressed behind the man's own yellow waxen mottled hands. Breast, throat, face were bludgeoned, ashen, and splattered in blood. The clothing was saturated. Frosted ice, condensed from the fog, studded the hair and beard. All this Chris and Warren observed without speaking. Glancing indirectly, they took in more of the macabre murder. Warren looked on as a gust of wind rattled the aged stalks of cane. Then he spoke, breaking the silence while slapping his leg with his cap. "What a horrible way to go! Poor guy never had a chance." Chris looked around at the graveyard, the abandoned church, and the isolation of where they were standing with the body. Neither had a weapon to protect themselves if the murderer was still around. Chris whispered to Warren as the fog continued to surround them. "The animal that did this to him may still be out here, Warren." Chris peered out to empty fields and the distance they were from the warm tractor. Maybe we should head back just in case. Warren whispered right back, also looking out to the encroaching ice and fog. I say, maybe you're right, Chris. As he spoke these words, Warren observed, flipped over next to the dead man, a tanned book with numbers in it. Some leaves fell onto the book as Warren bent down to pick it up. It was a metal detector treasure book. Opening the pages and reviewing, he discovered a name inscribed as the owner of the book. Dionysus Chennault. Warren continued reading through. Toward the back of the book, Warren found a peculiar annotation. It was written in what looked like blood, scribbled poorly and almost indecipherable. Warren read the dead man's last words to Chris as ice pelted them and a gale of fog and wind kicked up. As Chris listened to Warren's narration, he watched the gray horizon and edges of encroaching mist in the cane field carefully. For some reason, the place was giving him a shiver of unease, especially hearing the drop of ice from every creaking branch. Timeless spider, what mysteries and magic you weave, spinning eternal webs from a cold grave to deceive. Twisted vine drops, a most curious carrion fruit, as blood drips drop by drop to each famished root. Ancient ones, hear my song on hurricane wind. Riddled in gilded strife, I can no longer pretend. Desperately I try to remember the golden glory of my life. Shadowed and sullen, my soul bleeds by razored knife. Darkness, my jester, I implore to conquer a demon's death. Unforgivable woe, unforgiven act, taking her last breath. Mother sad and screeching, are you no more? Funeral shrouded, rotted I believe, you scream at my chamber door. 1,000 times Warren had read all of the hymn there was to read. Seems the words were stopped abruptly. That's a weird group of verses, said Chris to Warren. He had stalled his glance of the cane, vineyard fields, and cemetery to look one more time at the body of Dionysus Chennault. Who was this guy? Warren asked indifferent. This was one of a few bona fide Avoca Island nutcases, Warren. I remember his name now, Dionysus Chennault. He had been in some sort of trouble. There was a police case where Dionysus, enraged at his mother, killed her. She had secretly married plantation owner Terrell Morvant against Dionysus' wishes. The coroner, obviously paid off, was vague, but says Chennault accidentally knocked her down the stairs. At least, that's what the court said. Town gossip, you know, said the opposite. By the look of him, I guess he never got over the murder. Chris shook his head, recalling the man. Warren sarcastically says, he might have had a great future in the music business, even if his stuff is way too dark, man. Way too weird, my brother, Chris responded, rubbing his temples. Well, I don't know about you, but I've had enough of the ice out here, said Warren. How about we wait in the tractor, where it's at least toasty? The coroner and cop should be here soon. Chris nodded, and both moved to leave the body where it was. Chris kicked something, possibly a rock, near the dead man. As he went to move the stone, he saw it was instead of a rock, a gold and diamond studded locket with the words, "To Mother." Inside it was a picture of Dionysus with his mother. "Wow, the locket!" exclaimed Chris. "The Chennault missing locket. Dionysus offered thousands of dollars to anyone who could find it. Apparently, according to gossip, it was the reason he killed her. She must have been wise to his intentions before her death and hid it. But how on earth did it end up here?" He must have finally been able to locate it after all these years with the detector. And whoever killed him wanted it just as bad as he did, said Warren. "We definitely better get out of here. Leave the locket. That's bad business to remove it from here." Chris shrugged, then dropped the locket back onto the ground next to the corpse. Cackle and hiss startled both men. From the furthest horizon of fog, a mile or more away, they heard that chilling sound. Deliberate, demonic, and soulless was that laugh, devoid of joy and devoid of happiness. That laugh held the predatory repose of a wolf or something worse. Distinct and malevolent, the terrible cackle seemed to encroach closer. It was unnerving, unnameable in origin, and unnatural. "It's time to go." Warren said the words as both ran to the tractor and left the field to the devil and the cold dead. As the hissing, shrieking cackle had grown out of silence, so now the laugh returned to the iced ground. Neither man looked back to that field as they drove the tractor in haste back to the heated sanctuary of home. From that shrieking, that blood-curdling scream that almost shattered their ears, the banshee drew itself away. Back into the darkest depths of that purple cane field, it withdrew. Drawn between the skeletal stalks of scorched cane and the silence of frosted cold earth, the banshee found solace and a restful release. Thank you for listening. Have a great night.